Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us for the 2019 CLS Chinese Site-Specific Virtual Pre-Departure Orientation. My name is Stephanie Lee, and I'm the Senior Program Officer for the CLS Chinese Institutes at American Councils for International Education.
And my name is Chris Stiles, and I'm the Program Officer for the Chinese Institutes at American Councils.
We would like to start out by saying congratulations again on receiving a U.S. Department of State Critical Language Scholarship Award. CLS provides you with an amazing opportunity to devote 2 full months to rapidly increasing your proficiency in Chinese language and gaining firsthand understanding of the culture. The program is designed to challenge you and to allow you as much opportunity as possible to increase your Chinese proficiency in a short period of time.
In today's orientation, we have 2 main objectives. The first is to provide you with site-specific information about your CLS program, and the second is to help you understand and recognize some of the challenges of CLS in China, as well as provide you with some strategies for adjusting to the culture, keeping safe, and staying healthy. Some of the topics we're going to discuss today include an introduction to your program officers, the weekly schedule, language learning in China, strategies for adapting to a multilingual environment, cultural differences, identity and diversity, living with a Chinese host family or roommate, language partners, health and safety, site-specific policies, and pre-departure orientation in Washington, D.C., and some other next steps that you can expect.
And now it's time for you to meet your CLS program officers for the program. As you probably already know from correspondence up to this point, Stephanie Lee and Chris Stiles are your main contacts in the spring as you prepare to go overseas.
Stephanie Lee has been working on CLS for 8 years and has accumulated a wealth of knowledge and experience that has made her an expert in the field of study abroad. She works on the Chinese programs and also oversees other program officers on the CLS team.
Chris Stiles has been with CLS for a little over a year as a program officer and also worked as a resident director, or RD, on CLS in 2017 in the Chinese city of Suzhou. He works on the Chinese programs together with Stephanie Lee. During the summer, we will be working closely with your on-site resident director and the institute staff to stay informed about the program, respond to inquiries, and resolve any issues that may arise.
As you are likely well aware, CLS is a group-based program. As a CLS finalist, you will be part of a group that is anywhere from 22 to 23 students, depending on your site. During the CLS program, all of your classes and activities will be group-based, and everyone generally shares the same schedule. On the screen, you will see a sample schedule of what a general CLS week may look like. However, there might be some variations depending on the site. Everything in the program is designed for language learning in a group setting. You may have less flexibility and independence with your schedule than you're used to, and activities and topics may not necessarily coincide with your field of study or your personal interests. Take this as an opportunity to gain insights into something new and learn about a topic that you are not so familiar with. Another important thing to note is that your CLS institutes will have teachers who are from China, so the curriculum and teaching styles may be different from your experiences in the U.S. For example, the classroom culture could be more formal than what you're used to. We'll talk more about this later. As you can see, you will be very busy every day. The program is designed to provide you as much opportunity as possible to rapidly increase your Chinese proficiency, but you may also find that you don't have as much free time as you're used to. 8 weeks is not a lot of time, so we're asking you to hit the ground running, adjust to everything, such as jet lag, food, traffic, while also taking on enormous amounts of language instruction. This is why we strongly recommend that students do not pursue additional coursework or research in China during the CLS program. If you're thinking that this seems very restrictive, please think again about what the CLS opportunity is: a competitive opportunity to study a critical foreign language abroad, fully funded for academic credit in 1 summer. You can think of this as a job. You're being funded to learn Chinese.
And now we will talk about language learning on the CLS program. An important thing to remember is that the classroom plays a different role in an overseas immersion environment than it does in the U.S. Your Chinese classroom in the U.S. is probably the main, if not only, exposure you have to a foreign language. Because of that, there is a burden on the classroom to be the source of new content to allow you to increase your proficiency. Your classes with the CLS program will certainly present new content, but there is not the same burden on the classroom environment to be the only source of the new content. You will be exposed to unfamiliar vocabulary, new expressions, and grammatical structures when you spend time with your host family, your language partner, when you are riding the bus, when you are walking around town, basically everywhere. Of course, that's the beauty of immersion and probably an aspect of the program that you are looking forward to. It also means, however, that the function of the classroom in the immersion environment is different than the function of a language classroom in the U.S. You will probably notice that your classes overseas will tend to focus on content that might already be familiar to you. Your teachers will not necessarily consider this review, because what they are looking for is mastery of the concepts, not simply familiarity with these concepts. You can think about this in contrast to your experience with language study in the U.S. Here, it is very often the case that you are introduced to a new topic, for instance, using dynamic particles on a Monday, do some written and oral drills throughout the week, have a quiz on dynamic particles on Friday, and then move on to a new topic. In China, the focus will be on activation of your linguistic skills. Teachers will want to hear you use material that was covered previously with accuracy and consistency. If you make mistake on material previously covered, it is likely the teacher will continue to reinforce the material that you are using incorrectly until you're able to produce it correctly all the time. If you have studied verbal complements using the in the past, but cannot consistently use them correctly, you can be sure that there will be time spent in the classroom on verbal complements.
Another difference that you'll notice when you're in China is that your classes will be taught completely in Chinese. This is a key feature of the immersion experience. It also means that grammar terminology such as the names of cases and grammatic elements will be used in Chinese. We also want to note here that you will be expected to read and write Chinese characters. If you are not already familiar with reading and writing Chinese characters, we strongly recommend that you spend some time preparing before you go on the program. Doing this will make transitioning to the Chinese classroom environment much easier. And while some of the topics that will be covered in your courses will likely be familiar to you, you'll also discuss things that you've never discussed in a language class previously. We hope that you find this both challenging and interesting, but there may be times where you find it to be uncomfortable. Topics may be uninteresting to you, for instance. You might be asked to describe how a machine works or how to complete a process. You might find this boring, but it is an important linguistic skill to be able to describe different things, including those outside of your academic major and personal experiences. You might also be asked to complete assignments or speak about subjects that you don't fully agree with. For example, you might be asked to write an essay about a heteronormative topic. If you're a man, you might be asked to write an essay about your ideal wife, and if you're a woman, about your ideal husband. While these types of assignments can sometimes feel uncomfortable, they will also allow you to use your language skills in a new way, and they'll also give you insight into the host culture. Our best advice in these situations is to stay neutral about the subject matter and focus on the linguistic skills that you're using. What new vocabulary can you incorporate into your essay? What about any new grammar constructions you've learned in the past few weeks? Focusing on the language aspect will allow you to make progress toward your own goal. An additional thing to take note of is that there may be certain subjects that teachers are uncomfortable discussing, that are considered taboo in the host culture, and even subjects that staff and teachers specifically ask you not to discuss. Again, remember that you are a guest in this culture, and that your ultimate purpose is to learn the language, not specifically to discuss your own view of a specific topic. If you trust the process, trust that teachers know what they're doing, and that the program has been designed for maximum language gains, as well as fully participate in all the elements of the program, you will learn and grow during your CLS experience. Don't allow a particular assignment or a topic to steer you away from your ultimate goal of gaining cultural knowledge and improving your language skills. As you might imagine, all of these differences and the constant demands on your language skills will likely make you feel as though you're being pushed to your linguistic limits at times. You might even feel occasionally that you're getting worse, but believe me, you're not getting worse. You might also feel exhausted by being surrounded by Chinese language all the time, and that is completely normal. It is the process of engaging with the language at all times, including when it is challenging and exhausting, that will allow you to make Chinese your second language, one that you can communicate in, rather than just a foreign language that you're only studying in the classroom.
Another thing that you will want to be aware of while learning Chinese in China is that you may not only be hearing standard Mandarin spoken on the street or at home. Chinese cities are typically multilingual environments. While Mandarin is the only official language in China, and all citizens are required to learn it in school, you may find that you're living with a host family that speaks Mandarin with a strong accent or a regional dialect that is not Mandarin. This is likelier to be the case with older Chinese, such as grandparents who may be part of your host family. However, host families have been instructed to speak only Mandarin when communicating with you. Younger people tend to speak Mandarin with a fairly standard pronunciation, so you're less likely to encounter such issues if you're living with a Chinese roommate instead of a host family. You should be prepared to adjust to your expectations while on the program. Understanding that Mandarin is spoken with different accents, and you may encounter Chinese who are from other provinces and don't use precisely the same pronunciation as the Mandarin that you have studied. This may mean that you'll have a hard time understanding some people when they're speaking to you. Furthermore, others may have a hard time understanding you. Even if your pronunciation is perfect, but the tones are a little off, this could cause someone to look at you as if you spoke gibberish to them. Don't get frustrated. Try again and speak deliberately. Another piece of advice is to try not to let linguistic misunderstandings get under your skin or to take it personally. Give yourself some credit. Learning this language is hard, but you also face tough competition for the privilege of doing it, so we think you're up for the challenge. Fortunately, you're going to hear a lot of Mandarin spoken everywhere, and the characters are universal despite some differences in spoken Chinese, so your character reading and writing will come in handy. As mentioned earlier, you will find it helpful to review Chinese characters before the program if you haven't spent much time on this in the past. We have lots of data to demonstrate students on past programs have made significant proficiency gains as measured by the oral proficiency interview from before the program to after the program. We are confident that you are going to make strong gains in your ability to speak and understand Chinese and navigate the local culture, even if you're occasionally frustrated and feel like you aren't progressing. Finally, we want you to have fun and enjoy your CLS experience this summer. Don't let your occasional frustration with the linguistic situation get in the way of that.
Continuing on the topic of academic culture, let's talk a bit about some specific differences between a typical classroom in the U.S. and in China. The chart you see on the screen is comparing typical classes in the U.S. and Chinese universities, but won't necessarily reflect your specific class with CLS. For example, Chinese class sizes tend to be very large with over 40 students, but your CLS class will likely have about 6 to 8 students. You'll find that most, if not all, of your teachers have worked with American students in the past, but you can still expect some basic differences in how classes are run in China versus in the U.S. The CLS program does not aim to create an American-style classroom experience for you overseas. If that were the goal, we could just hold the program in the U.S. and not have to go through the whole arduous process of applying for visas for everyone. A big part of the CLS program model is providing students with opportunities to adapt to different ways of doing things, and classes are a prime example of this. You may find in particular that teachers offer a lot more oral feedback than you are used to. You might find they often interrupt you in order to correct your grammar, word usage, or pronunciation. Although this style of teaching will likely feel uncomfortable to you, it is not considered rude in the Chinese context. In fact, it would be considered poor teaching if a teacher did not correct a student when they made a mistake. Another cultural difference you may take note of during your first few weeks of the program are the way that corrections are made. In China, you will find that teachers almost never tell you that your incorrect answer is close to correct or almost right. They will likely not praise you just for trying. Instead, they will be clear about when an answer you give is absolutely correct or when it is incorrect. They will tell you in a straightforward way in both written and oral form that your answer is right or wrong. Additionally, you may find that some teachers make comparisons at times among group members. You might be surprised to hear that a teacher tells you you should be more like Sally because Sally is doing better than you academically. You shouldn't take offense to this. This is actually meant to help you. Really, the teacher probably means that Sally understands the material more fully than you do, and thus is recommending that you ask Sally for some tips about how she studies. Coming to understand how classrooms are run in China will give you some insight into the Chinese education system as a whole, and also into the society more broadly. Use your time in the classroom to observe how the Chinese academic process works, as well as using it to expand your linguistic knowledge.
It's all but certain you will encounter many cultural differences in China. Some may confuse or upset you, while others may excite and intrigue you. It's best to approach unfamiliar or confusing situations with patience, communication, and a sense of humor. Here's a few more major cultural differences that you may experience. Staring. Staring means different things in different cultures. In the US, you are taught that staring is rude and you shouldn't stare. However, in China, staring is not considered rude and people stare at people and things that look foreign. Even though more and more Chinese have seen or had interactions with foreigners, there is still a large percentage of Chinese who have never seen a foreigner. And to see a foreigner living in their community for most is even a rarer sight. It will take some patience to get used to this and to the word that typically accompanies the stares, 老外, which means foreigner, but try to keep in mind that the stares are out of curiosity, and the best way to deal with those, depending on your mood, is to ignore them or take the opportunity to say 你好 and meet someone new. Personal space and privacy. Not only does China have a large population and there are crowds everywhere you go, the Chinese also treat the space around them as communal. People stand close to each other, and you'll notice that many people make their way through crowds without saying, "Excuse me." So you may feel like your personal space is being invaded. Topics of conversation. Every culture has topics of conversation that can be openly discussed in society. Strangers and friends may offer unsolicited advice about health, such as don't let the fan blow on you directly, cover your stomach, and don't go outdoors with wet hair. The Chinese may also ask direct questions about money, how much tuition you pay, how much your family earns, how much your phone or computer cost. Many people are comfortable with these issues, are curious about foreigners, and do not consider these topics private. Public displays of affection. Chinese seldom express their affection physically, especially in public, even among family members. Even though the younger generations are more used to the idea of hugging and public displays of affection, this is still not commonly seen. However, you may see same-gender friends holding hands as they walk down the street, and that is perfectly normal in China.
Now we're going to talk a little bit about identity and diversity in China. Gender roles. You'll likely encounter more normative ideas about gender roles than you may be used to in the U.S. In many cases, even if a woman works outside the home, she may also be expected to manage the home, including food preparation, laundry, cleaning, and childcare. Men are responsible for earning a good living and taking care of mechanical and other maintenance items around the house, unless you're my brother-in-law. You'll likely also encounter generalized statements about how men and women are like or should act. You may disagree and find this offensive, but remember, this is an opportunity for you to reflect on the norms and expectations that you are bringing to China with you. We like to suggest that students take an anthropological perspective during their CLS program and aim to use this opportunity to learn and gain understanding without rushing to judgment. What do these more normative gender roles mean for you? Well, it doesn't mean that you should change who you are, but rather that you should expect people will react to you differently in China than you might be accustomed to in the U.S. You can expect, for instance, that host family members or your roommate will ask you about your opposite-sex boyfriend or girlfriend, even if you have not introduced any related information into the conversation. If your typical dress or hairstyle is more similar to that of someone in the host community of the opposite gender, you might find that your language partner comments on it or your host family comments on it. If you're concerned about these types of situations, please do feel free to reach out directly to us or to alumni who have noted that they are open to talking about these topics in the Alumni Resource Directory. Most Chinese people who have not had much exposure to foreigners will assume that Americans are white. They may feel puzzled and have out-of-date views regarding African Americans and Asian Americans. If you're a student of color, you might find yourself presented with assumptions, often based on film, music, and other popular entertainment. If you are not white, you might find that Chinese ask you directly to identify your race or ethnic background. You might also find that if you're a student of color, some Chinese citizens might have a hard time accepting that you are an American. For example, Chinese Americans may have to constantly explain why they don't speak Chinese fluently and that they're not Chinese. African Americans may have to deal with comments about their skin color. In China, lighter skin is considered a sign of attractiveness, and many women purchase skin lightening creams, so you might hear your Chinese friends refer to someone as attractive if their skin is pale. CLS students of color have reported in the past that most incidents tend to be fleeting and innocuous enough that they can dismiss them and carry on, although it is important to know that even innocent attention can be tiresome and troubling. Chinese attitudes and perceptions towards LGBTQI-identified individuals also differ. American councils does not advise lying about or hiding your sexual orientation, but we do encourage LGBTQI students to be guarded, even with your host family, roommate, or language partner. This is particularly important at the beginning of the program, before you've gotten to know them and how they may respond. Generally, LGBTQI individuals in China do not show affection in public and are not open about their sexual orientation with strangers. Thus, you should be extremely confidential about the identity of Chinese LGBTQI friends. You may also wish to be discreet about your own sexual orientation in public, as it is difficult to judge how strangers may react. On the topic of religion, the people of China predominantly belong to the Buddhism faith. Minorities include Taoist, Islamic, and Catholic. However, large numbers of people of all ethnic groups are non-religious or secular. People will generally not make a lot of assumptions about your religion and will likely not even bring up this topic unless you wear clothing or jewelry that easily identifies you as a practitioner of a specific faith. In such cases, you may find that locals are curious about your background and beliefs. It is important to note that there may be very limited opportunities to practice your religion at a designated house of worship. If you are interested in finding a place of worship in China, reaching out to alumni is another great way to talk through their experiences and get their advice. Remember, CLS alumni can be a great resource if you are concerned about ethnic, racial, religious, or gender-based prejudice in China. The Alumni Network is a diverse group, and you can connect easily with them via Facebook, the CLS Chinese Alumni Resource Directory, and through direct contact with alumni ambassadors.
Now let's talk about another exciting feature of the CLS program, and that's living with a Chinese roommate or host family, and what life with a roommate or host family will be like. Students will live with host families in Dalian and Suzhou, and live with Chinese roommates in the university dormitory in Changchun and Xi'an. The purpose of host families and roommates is to provide language practice and an authentic cultural experience. The goal of your living arrangement is to provide a better understanding of Chinese culture and language, not a surrogate family or luxury accommodations. You will gain a whole new set of vocabulary through hearing people of different ages, backgrounds, education levels speak Chinese, as well as develop personal connections with your roommate or members of your host family. To maximize your language and cultural learning through the host family or roommate program, every host family and roommate is vetted by the CLS Institute local staff. Every host family and roommate goes through an interview process, and the local staff also conducts visits to the home and meetings with the family or roommate prior to them being selected. Some host families and roommates have worked with the CLS program before, but all are required to participate in training before the start of the program each summer. Your resident director and or housing coordinator will also conduct visits to the host families and dorms during the program. For those of you living with host families are required to provide you with breakfast and dinner daily, a private room, and a key to the apartment. However, Wi-Fi and air conditioning are not required. You will receive a stipend to cover meals not provided by the host family. For those living with Chinese roommates, you will share a room with one roommate of the same gender, and room will have a private bathroom, and internet and air conditioning are provided. Host families and roommates are required to speak Chinese to you, just as you are required to speak Chinese to them. However, they know you are there to learn, and they're not expecting you to speak perfectly.
Now we're going to talk a little bit about the diversity of host families or roommates. You will receive your host family or roommate information after you arrive in China because the student list is still changing. It's difficult for us to place students so far in advance as when a new student is promoted. We might need to take into consideration medical and dietary restrictions and make adjustments as needed. We realize you are eager to find out who you will be living with this summer, so thank you for your patience and understanding of that. Just like you all come from different backgrounds, your host families and roommates will also be different and may not all come from the same city in your Chinese CLS Institute. Some host families have children, some may be a single person, and some may have extended family living at home. Roommates will come from all over China. Some are undergrads and some are grad students with different majors and interests. Some host families may be a 10-minute walk from the universities, but others may be a 30 to 45-minute commute. Almost all host families will live in high-rise apartment buildings. Some host families and roommates may be actively religious, while others may be atheists. You will find great diversity between each of your host families and roommates. We ask CLS host families and roommates to be open-minded about the student who you live with or the family that you live with through the summer. And we also ask that you be open-minded about your host family or roommate in general. There will be a diversity of experiences related to them, but there's a lot you can do to make this a positive experience. We encourage you to brainstorm ways to engage with your host family or roommate prior to the pre-departure orientation in Washington, D.C. Feel free to reach out to alumni about this. They are a great resource.
And now we'll talk about some norms of living with a Chinese host family or roommate. Life is very communal in China, so do not expect the same amount of alone time you have in the U.S. Your family or roommate may want to be very involved in your everyday life. Your host family or roommate may also not have the same understanding of privacy as you're used to in the U.S. You may find your host family entering your room without knocking or cleaning up your room while you're at school, or your roommate picking up one of your books to read without asking. All these may bother you, and you can definitely discuss these with your host family or roommate, but please also keep in mind that a lot of the time, this is also their way of showing that they're treating you more like family or a close friend rather than a stranger or guest living with them. Remember, it's okay to communicate your needs, but be polite. That said, there also may be some times when your family or roommate doesn't seem as engaged with you, particularly in the last days of June if you're living with a roommate or if your host family has a child in school. The Chinese education system has a much later semester end date, typically in late June, early July. So the time you're arriving on the program is when students are busy cramming for finals. So please be understanding if at times your roommate or host sibling is too stressed to be going out with you or otherwise interacting with you. This would be a great opportunity to have joint study sessions with your roommate or host sibling. You might notice that your host family or roommate uses a more indirect communication style than Americans do. For example, if you do something to upset your host family, they are less likely to directly confront you about it. If you directly confront your host family or roommate about their behavior, they may be uncomfortable or embarrassed, and they may feel like they've lost face. This doesn't mean you should necessarily change your behavior, but it is helpful to be aware that if you're stepping on someone's toes, they might not be willing to tell you. We ask that when interacting with your host family or roommate that you observe their behaviors to get a sense of what might be considered normal to them. For example, if you notice that your host family or roommate keeps putting out house slippers for you day after day and they themselves wear them inside, take that as a cue that's what you should also be wearing. But they may be too embarrassed to tell you. You might also think about more subtle ways to communicate disagreements. For example, maybe and it's inconvenient are common ways Chinese people say no. On the matter of gift giving, you might decide to bring a gift for your host family or roommate. We understand it's hard to purchase gifts when you don't know who you will be living with. There is a section on gift giving in the online participant handbook, and we also discuss gift giving as it pertains to Chinese culture in the site-specific handbook.
In addition to the cultural immersion you'll experience in your host family or with your roommate, you'll also have the opportunity to get a Chinese-speaking member of the host community through the CLS Language Partner Program. Language partners are local students who are carefully selected to help motivate CLS participants to make active use of the target language. Their role is to support participants' studies, enhance their conversational skills, and, most importantly, to be their key to the host city, its people, culture, and traditions. Language partners are required to speak with students in the target language and will be prohibited from speaking in English per the language policy. Your language partner will be a student from the host university, similar to you in age, but may be of a different gender. You are required to meet with your language partner for a minimum of 3 hours each week, and they are there to help you practice your Chinese in an informal setting and to introduce you to the local culture. Some suggested activities you can do with your language partner include discussing your favorite Chinese books. We've had students read Harry Potter in Chinese with their language partners, or visit local museums. You can ask your language partner to take you around town to their favorite places to hang out, and you can also ask to meet your language partner's friends and or their family. You should also be prepared to identify times when you're free and to come up with some ideas of what you would like to do. If you have questions about what is appropriate to do with your language partner, we encourage you to reach out to the RD or to talk to your fellow classmates who may be willing to share ideas. One thing to keep in mind is when it comes to language partners, try not to do too many activities that might require a lot of money. The language partners are college students, and they didn't receive a stipend for the summer to spend time with you. So when you suggest activities, please be considerate of the fact that these are students on a budget. Also, keep in mind that if you want to do something special that requires money, such as going to a movie, or if you want to meet at a cafe every time you meet, you should offer to pay for the movie ticket or the drink at the cafe.
Chinese laws on drugs and other illicit substances are very strict. Although marijuana is becoming increasingly legalized in some countries and even in some U.S. states, this is not the case in China. It is also still illegal in the U.S. under federal law, and thus use is prohibited while on CLS. Keep in mind that use of illegal drugs while on the program is against CLS policies, but is also a violation of Chinese laws. Penalties in China for using or distributing drugs can be extremely severe. You may have seen in the news recently that a Canadian citizen was sentenced to death for drug trafficking. Foreigners do not get any special treatment under Chinese law.
Just a few more health and safety items to keep in mind that are more specific to China. And we'll talk more about health and safety at the pre-departure orientation in Washington, D.C., as well as at the in-country orientation after you arrive in China. Prepare yourself for bustling traffic. The days of fleets of bicycles on the road are long gone, replaced instead by droves of cars. Although not as numerous as in the 70s and 80s, there are still plenty of bicycles, scooters, and other unconventional vehicles or modes of transportation that you don't see so commonly in the U.S. Keep in mind that there's a general disregard for traffic rules. For example, cars don't stop for pedestrians at crosswalks without a light. They sometimes run red lights. They often don't stay within their lanes, and the sidewalk is typically a free-for-all space. You'll see cars parked on the sidewalk, and you might even have to dodge cars, scooters, or bicycles competing with you for sidewalk space. China is notorious for its poor air quality. If you're asthmatic, please bring your inhaler. However, you will see blue sky days, and when those come, go out and enjoy yourself. We encourage you to talk with your host family, roommate, or language partner about which types of face masks are most effective and for help in purchasing them once you arrive in your host city. You should drink bottled water or boiled water only. Don't drink water from the tap as it may be contaminated. Even boiled water can still contain heavy metals and hazardous chemical elements, so you may wish to stick with bottled water. You may experience minor sickness or stomach discomfort that could cause you to require a visit to a doctor or pharmacy. If so, you'll no doubt have a different experience from what you're used to in the U.S. Your resident director or other institute staff member will accompany you to the doctor on your first visit, and as needed throughout the summer. You'll have to get used to Chinese-style or squat toilets. Most public restrooms or restrooms in business establishments only have squat toilets, and that is also the case in the academic buildings where your classes will be held. Air conditioning is not always available everywhere, and there may be occasional power outages during the summer. Although these things may sound challenging, keep in mind that they also give you valuable insight into the culture and how people live in China. We encourage you to look at things through an anthropological lens and appreciate this experience to learn firsthand what it's like to live in China. This is an experience you can't get sitting in a classroom in the U.S.
There are also many good things that you will experience, and this will allow you to discover what makes China amazing. Although the hospitals and clinics you visit may not be Western style, they are modern. You'll also find that going to the doctor is much cheaper in China. It's so cheap, in fact, that most participants don't even bother using insurance. You will, of course, have insurance through ASPE, as was mentioned in the general virtual pre-departure orientation. You will have access to Western-style toilets at your host family or in your dorm room. Some of the more recently built shopping centers or malls often have Western toilets as well. There is an abundance of fresh fruit and vegetables available in China, some of which you probably have never seen before. Take advantage of the opportunity to try these, but be sure to wash them thoroughly before eating. One of the most incredible and pleasing aspects of being in China is you will find authentic Chinese food from different regions all over China at very cheap prices. You will have a hard time believing that food so good can be so cheap.
In addition to the CLS program-wide terms and conditions that you signed, each program site also has its own site-specific policies that you will agree to as a CLS participant. You may think the program is too strict with so many policies, But we do want to remind everyone again that the CLS program is a group-based intensive language learning program fully funded by the U.S. Department of State. So many of the policies are designed to help keep participants on track with their language learning and to uphold the integrity of the program, ensuring that one student's behavior does not disrupt the entire group. Now we'll take a look at them, and the Institute staff will go over policies in more detail during the in-country orientation.
As you've already heard mentioned frequently, it's no secret CLS enforces a language policy, and this is one of the most important policies for helping participants achieve major language gains throughout the summer. The goal of the language policy is to encourage you to practice Chinese as much as possible. You will get much more out of the program than someone who only uses Chinese when they have to, if you are not afraid and try to speak it as much as possible. So with this policy, you will agree to use only Chinese when you're in class, at the institute, on program activities, and with the staff, your host family or roommate, language partner, and your CLS peers. Your RD will administer a language policy where you vow to speak only in Chinese for the duration of the program. You will sign this policy in good faith. So are we asking you to not utter another word of English after you sign the language policy? No, because that's not enforceable. And we realize that there are times when you just need to take a break from Chinese and speak some English. We're not going to have the resident director follow you around all day or try to sneak up on you when you're out and about to see if you're speaking English. It's up to you to make the most out of this. And year after year in the post-program evaluation, the single most uttered advice to future students is try to stick to the language policy more. This is also the most oft-cited regret, that students didn't stick to the language policy enough. Of course, if the RD hears you violating the language policy in some of these settings we just talked about, you may be issued a warning. Exceptions where you are allowed to speak English at the institute or on program activities are during the weekly meeting with the RD and during an emergency. With that in mind, take advantage of this wonderful immersion experience to practice your Chinese all the time. You should be speaking Chinese in CLS classes, on the institute grounds, such as in hallways or in the cafeteria, on group excursions and trips, when speaking with your language partner, when speaking with your host family or roommate, when speaking with local staff, officials, and teachers, and when speaking with your CLS peers.
The host family or roommate agreement shouldn't be too difficult to follow, as many of the items are common sense and simply the courtesy you would extend to someone who is opening up their home to you. These are the rules of the house, no pun intended. Respect my host family members or roommate. Follow the household or dormitory rules. Try to be flexible and understanding of my family or roommate and their customs, diets, and schedules, and understand that they are not expected to alter their lives because of me. Keep my room neat. Inform my host family or roommate if I will be coming home later than usual or traveling away from the host city. Be prepared to do my own laundry, and ask permission before inviting friends over, and avoid having overnight guests. One item that we'd like to draw your attention to is the last clause, that you would ask permission before inviting friends over and no overnight guests. Remember that disciplinary action may be taken for violating any of these rules.
We know many of you are eager to do some weekend trips away from your host city while you're on the CLS program, and we do encourage this, as independent travel is a great opportunity to apply your Chinese language skills and experience Chinese culture. You will receive your program schedule when you arrive on site, and the schedule will tell you how many weekends are free for independent travel where no program activities are planned. A few things to keep in mind. You must submit an independent travel form to your RD 48 hours before your planned travel. There is no travel the first weekend of the program when you've just arrived and need to acclimate to get ready for classes, and the last weekend of the program when you're preparing for finals or should be packing and spending the last days with your host family or roommate before returning to the U.S. Independent travel cannot conflict with classes or any other program activities. No travel to Tibet, Hong Kong, Macau, and Taiwan while on the program. You must also return to your host family or dormitory by curfew time on Sunday night so that you are prepared for classes Monday morning. What we want to avoid is having students return at 5 a.m. on Monday morning and are so exhausted from the weekend trip that they cannot fully engage in class. And lastly, acceptance of your travel form does not mean the Department of State, American councils, or the host institution can guarantee the safety of your travel. The form asks where you'll be going, the departure and arrival times of your flight, train, or bus, whether you'll be traveling with someone, and where you'll be staying. The reason we ask for this detailed information is because we want to see that you have done your research and you have a plan in place for safety reasons. What we're trying to avoid is having a student go on independent travel with no reserved transportation or accommodation and just say, "Oh, I'm going to take a bus. If the bus isn't running that day, then I'll hitchhike, and when I get to my destination, I'll just crash somewhere." The form also gives the RD an opportunity to review your itinerary and determine the feasibility of your plan. We often have students who are so excited to travel that they cram too much into a weekend or cut their travel times too close. And in those cases, the RD may ask you to revise your plan to something that is more realistic to accomplish in a weekend. But again, all these are precautions. You will still need to be responsible for your own safety during independent travel.
And then just a few other site-specific policies. In classes, no eating and cell phone usage is allowed. However, you may drink water and soft drinks. You must raise your hand to speak if you have a question. And as a courtesy, ask the teacher for permission if you need to leave the classroom for any reason. You should be appropriately dressed. Unlike some other CLS program sites, the Chinese sites don't actually have strict dress codes that students must follow. However, we do ask students to please observe what other students and members of the host community are wearing and dress similarly and appropriately. Curfew times. Yes, we do have to designate curfew times. You must return home by 10 p.m. Sunday through Thursday and midnight Friday and Saturday. Once again, out of respect and courtesy, we ask you to inform your host family or roommate if you usually come home from school by 6 p.m., but say wouldn't be returning until 10 p.m. one day. This is for a few different reasons. Firstly, your host family or roommate will probably worry, and if you're not home by curfew time, they most definitely would be calling the housing coordinator or resident director to speak about your safety. Secondly, if you're living with a host family, they will be preparing meals for you, and it would be inconsiderate if you didn't make it home in time for dinner without informing them first. Also, you should do your best to notify your host family early enough that they won't have started already preparing your meal. No participation in demonstrations or political activities for safety reasons. And lastly, your institutes may implement additional travel restrictions during the summer based on political events.
Now that we've covered the basics of what you can expect in China, we know many of you have questions about what to expect next in terms of coming to DC. So let's talk about that. Before we bring you to DC, you need to complete all your pre-program requirements. Most of you have already completed your pre-program requirements on the Accepted Student Portal and sent in your official transcripts. But if you have not completed any of the above requirements, or if you have not completed your oral proficiency interview or the OPI, please make sure you do so, as you will not be permitted to participate on the CLS program otherwise. And as you complete your pre-program requirements, in return we will give you your stipend check. Your stipend check has been sent out to the address we verified with you. If you have not received your stipend by May 15th, please let us know so we can prepare to issue you a new check that we can give you in DC at the pre-departure orientation to deposit or cash. You will also receive in May your train or flight ticket information for your travel to Washington, D.C. and to and from your host city in China. An email with instructions on where you'll be staying for the pre-departure orientation in D.C. will also be sent to you in May. And your passport, which we know you're most anxious about, will be returned to you with your Chinese visa when you check in for the pre-departure orientation at the hotel in D.C. After the pre-departure orientation, you will also receive a CLS t-shirt, a smoke detector for you to install in your room at your host family or in the dorm room, and a textbook, so make sure you save room in your suitcase for those items. Please remember to bring with you to Washington, D.C. the following: a business casual outfit for the pre-departure orientation, where you'll be addressed by a keynote speaker from the U.S. Department of State, so you want to look presentable.
Now, here are some other things you can expect at the pre-departure orientation, or PDO as we like to call it. Most students will be arriving by plane, although there may be cases where students will be arriving by train or other means of transportation. Students will arrive in D.C. on the first day of the PDO, likely between 11 a.m. and 4 p.m., and you'll make your way from the airport to the hotel in D.C. The airport is about 40 minutes from D.C. by car, although we recommend that you use public transit to save on costs, and public transit is substantially cheaper than the other options. There is a bus available to transfer to the nearest metro station, which is Washington, D.C.'s subway system. You'll be able to take the metro to a station near your hotel. Other options, although considerably pricier, are the Super Shuttle, app rides such as Lyfts and Ubers, or a taxi. Sometimes multiple CLS students will be arriving on the same flight, and in these cases, if you find other CLS students on the same flight willing to share a taxi with you, you can split the cab fare to keep the cost down. Once you arrive at the hotel, you will see a CLS registration table. You'll check in with us and then check in with the hotel. If you arrive at the hotel before the CLS staff gets there, please feel free to check into your room and then come down to the lobby later in the afternoon for registration. An evening reception will be held that day where you will meet other CLS staff and your fellow CLS peers. There will be some light snacks available at the reception. The second day is a full day of orientation activities. You'll be addressed by a keynote speaker from the Department of State, as we just mentioned, and also have the opportunity to listen to a panel of professionals who use critical languages in their fields of work, and be able to ask any career-related questions you have. You'll also attend a site-specific session and an alumni panel to learn about what life will be like in China on the CLS program. You'll have the evening free to have dinner with your new friends and explore DC if you so choose. The third day will be departure day, and some groups will have an early morning departure, even as early as 2 or 3 a.m., to the airport for the group flights to their respective program sites. This may sound early, but you're going to be so jet-lagged when you get to China, it's not really going to make much of a difference to you that you've only slept for a few hours before boarding your flight. Do, however, try to get a good night's sleep, and avoid drinking alcohol, as dehydration can severely worsen the effects of jet lag.
Now we will leave you with some tips and suggestions from past CLS participants. These are all words and wisdom from CLSers who have been in your shoes. First, we have things they wish they had known before going on the program. I wish I would have understood how intensive the academic program would be. Prior to departure, I was told many times about the rigor of the program, but failed to listen. Pinyin is not used in the classroom, other than the new vocabulary in the books. I feel that it would have been useful to study characters intensely prior to the program. I wish I had known more about the bathroom situation. I wish someone had told me that you cannot expect to find either A, Western toilets, or B, toilet paper in your typical bathroom.
And some more advice from past participants. Be flexible and go with the flow for any unexpected changes. Basically, try not to have too many expectations. Speak Chinese as much as possible. Be reasonable with yourself. Speak Chinese always. Be diligent with your homework. Take every opportunity you have to engage in your host culture and language. Explore and make new opportunities for yourself. At the same time, however, the experience is exhausting. If you don't allow yourself the occasional break, you will burn out. Find a balance. Really try to stick with the language policy. Speaking English is like a drug. Once you start, you don't want to stop. It was easier just to speak English, but only speaking Chinese really forces you to think about other ways to get your point across. Do not be afraid to say something wrong, because you will say many things wrong. Be willing to be corrected and be friendly. Friendliness can be easily translated across every language.
If there is another young American black girl like me, I would like her to know that her experience may not be the same as her other classmates. But that doesn't mean it can't also be equally rewarding. Sometimes the reward isn't just language growth, but personal growth. Try to move away from your life in America, and remember that your lifestyle is going to change whether you want it to or not. So try to embrace the lifestyle changes, and you might naturally form a new identity. I think that my Chinese self is a bit different than my American self, which helped me a lot in dealing with issues of cultural difference or difficulties that come up when you're living in China. Also, eat something different every day, and I also drank quite a lot of yogurt, which kept my stomach happy. I didn't have any digestive issues. Spend time with your roommate and go do things with your roommate. Never stop challenging yourself. Also, don't waste the first week being shy about your language abilities. Everyone is there to learn, and most native speakers want to help you learn.
We hope you found today's virtual pre-departure orientation informative and helpful. In addition, there are several other resources available to you that you might want to take a look at in the coming weeks. These include the CLS Chinese Facebook General Group, which I see many of you have joined and been active in. Also, at a later date, the CLS program will send you information about the Alumni Resource Directory and some more information about signing up for an individual alumni mentor, if that's something that is of interest to you. Stay tuned for a few other upcoming orientation videos, including the CLS Sexual Harassment Policy video, where we'll talk about program policies and expectations for preventing sexual harassment, but also what to do in the event that you are a victim or witness to sexual harassment, such as how to report and who to report to. Then later in May, you will have the opportunity to learn about the health benefits you will receive as a CLS awardee, the Accident and Sickness Program for Exchanges, or ASPE as we call it. We are also working on finalizing the site-specific participant handbook, and we'll share that with you via email in the coming weeks.
That concludes today's virtual pre-departure orientation. If you have questions, please feel free to contact us. Thank you to everyone for joining us today.